Street Talk! Yeah!
Welcome to Street Talk. I'm your host, Jason, and this is for Monday, December the 15th. Well, I took a few days off of Street Talk. Why? Because it was my birthday this past weekend. That's right. Happy birthday to myself. Had a really good time. Took some time off. Spent some time with some family, some friends. Had some extravaganzas, some galas, some blowouts. Jay-Z, Beyonce, all of my other imaginary celebrity friends were there. Too big to even recount. So like I said, I took some time off. Hope you guys navigated the waters without me and are still holding on to those win streaks. So, took some days off, so I'm going to do all three Monday night football props tonight. Chicago Bears hosting the New Orleans Saints. That's the whole game. Two in-game props. Who's going to have more receiving yards in the first half? Tight end Jimmy Graham or tight end Martellus Bennett? And for the second half prop, will any points be scored after the 2-minute warning in the fourth quarter? Interesting. Let's hold on to that for a second. Looking at the full game, well, New Orleans comes in at 5-8, still somehow has a chance to win their division. They're -3, even though they are on the road, even though it is outside, even though conditions look like it's going to be a little cooler and possibly rainy. Why? Well, Chicago, also at 5-8, really has had a disastrous season. There's been fighting in the locker room. There's been bickering between Jay Cutler and his offensive coordinator. Head coach Mark Trestman seemingly has lost complete control of the locker room. No one's really responding to him, and it appears that every single week the Bears somehow play worse than the week before. So when we just break down the numbers, neither team is really having a good defensive year by any stretch of the imagination. Against the rush, New Orleans 29th in the league at 133.5 yards a game. Chicago 17th, that's not terrible, but both against the pass are terrible. New Orleans is ranked 30th, Chicago ranked 31st. And as far as points allowed per game, New Orleans 30th, 27.6 points a game. Chicago dead last in the league, allowing 29.1 points per game. Really doesn't bode well for either defenses. Now, as far as coming in on Monday Night Football, Chicago actually, since 2010, has played pretty well. They're 8-2 on Monday Night Football. New Orleans in that same time period is 6-2, so obviously something has to give during this week. Breeze, in his last 11 Monday Night Football games, 32 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. So that does bode well, at least for the Saints. And the Saints are 9-2 in those Monday Night Football games. New Orleans, one of 4 teams averaging over 400 yards a game. So this seems like, if the Bears aren't careful, could get out of hand and possibly spiral out of control. But again, New Orleans playing outside, we sort of know that story. Playing out in the cold, never really fared well. They've always been shaky on the road, rock solid at home. But even this year, they're not even rock solid at home. See last week's blowout loss against the really mediocre Carolina Panthers team in the Superdome. That tells you all you need to know. Jay Cutler this year, we've been over this on Street Talk, but we'll go over it again. If he turns the ball over, the Bears are going to lose. If he keeps a pretty clean slate, the Bears are going to win. In the Bears' 5 victories this year, 11 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. In their 8 losses, 15 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. So, for me, Jay Cutler afterwards always looks like a sort of homeless man who's given up on life and doesn't care about anything anymore. There's always the smoking Jay Cutler memes that we see all over the internet, and that seems to be oftentimes what we get from him, the sort of sense of apathy. We know he's seething behind the scenes about his offensive coordinator sort of making disparaging remarks about him. So with Cutler, who knows what we're going to get. We know that Matt Forte has the potential to have a big game versus a very porous Saints defense. But over the last 2 weeks, the Bears have only amassed 48 yards rushing in 2 games. So really, that offense can't seem to get on track. Now they've lost Brandon Marshall for the year. I'm not sure how you can really trust Jay Cutler or the Bears at this point. For me, as far as the game goes, I would lean toward the Saints for the green. I wouldn't put any sort of streak on this whole game prop because, as I said, New Orleans shaky on the road, especially in inclement weather. Jay Cutler and the Bears really shaky all year long, and now they've lost one of their top receiving threats. So any sort of streak, I'd skip this. Maybe a little one, medium streak, possibly. I'd go with the Saints, but again, no confidence in that at all. We do know that the defensive coordinator for Chicago, Mel Tucker, is rumored to be being fired at the end of the year, probably for some of those reasons that I've already mentioned. We know the Saints safety Kenny Vaccaro is probably going to be benched for this game, probably for some of those defensive statistics that I've already mentioned. So really, how much can you trust either of these teams in this scenario? I would say Saints, but again, very, very low confidence. Now, for the first half prop, which tight end is going to get more receiving yards? Jimmy Graham for the Saints or Martellus Bennett for Chicago? Well, Bennett's probably going to receive a little bit of a boost for the reason I just mentioned. Brandon Marshall out for this game and the rest of the year after the injury last week. So, sheep are obviously going to be all over Jimmy Graham. He's sort of built that fantasy resume, had some big years in the past, has not had anywhere near the year that he normally does this year, but some of that has been due to injuries, some of that's been due to sort of the Saints' struggles, even some of the mysterious struggles at home, which they normally don't have. But going by the numbers, the Saints are actually very good at holding opposing tight ends to low amount of yardage. They've allowed a total of 503 yards to tight ends this year. Conversely, the Bears have allowed 775 yards total to tight ends this year. That's a pretty big disparity, and it's a little bit bigger of a disparity when we say if you just hold up the two tight ends, which one are you going to want? Obviously, you're going to want Jimmy Graham, and that's why all the sheep are on Jimmy Graham. Now, as far as just statistically first half splits, Jimmy Graham has 310 yards this year, Martellus Bennett 357. However, Graham has played in a couple less games. So if we're just dividing that out with games that they've played, Graham averages 28 yards in the first half. Martellus Bennett, wouldn't you know it, 27.5 yards. So it's going to be pretty close. If we just look at the comparison of the teams league-wide, the Saints have actually allowed the fourth fewest yards to tight end in the league, only behind the Seahawks, the Chiefs, and the Dolphins. Meanwhile, on the other side, the Bears have allowed the sixth most yards to tight ends and the second most touchdowns. Now, while touchdowns isn't involved in this prop, that tells you that come goal line, we already know Graham was going to get some red zone targets to begin with. If you're facing the team that's allowed the second most touchdowns to tight end in the league, it's probably going to be bumped up a bit. So for me, I like Jimmy Graham in this prop. I know that Bennett's probably going to receive a boost with Marshall being out because a lot of the attention is going to be shifted to Alshon Jeffrey. And maybe Forte gets some catches out of the backfield, takes away. But as far as statistics goes, this looks like a pretty okay pick to go with Jimmy Graham. Now, assuming that he's healthy, again, I did mention earlier that it's going to be rainy. I don't know how that'll come into play. I probably wouldn't risk a big streak on either of these first two props that are broken down. Which brings us to the third prop. Will points be scored after the 2-minute warning in the fourth quarter? Now, as I've mentioned many, many times on Street Talk, this isn't a prop that you would lock in until the last second. You don't lock this in the first quarter or before the game because you have to see how the game is going. And here is a scenario in which I think that relatively high streaks could pick this with confidence. And that would be if a team, hopefully the Saints, and I'll tell you why in a second, have a massive lead, then I think you could pick no relatively confidently. Now, monthly players are picking this regardless, and depending on the flow of the game, they can sort of get a sense, will points be scored, will it not? If it's a close game, points are more likely to be scored, especially if it's within a field goal and one of the teams is trying to tie it up. But let's assume for a second, or let's not assume, let's just talk about if the Saints are blowing them out, you got to have probably, like I mentioned, apathetic Jay Cutler. Maybe he's even been pulled at this point. I mean, imagine a 41-7 fourth quarter lead. I think you could select no there relatively confidently because the Bears won't be trying to just kick a meaningless field goal, and the Saints will probably just be trying to run the ball. So that's a scenario that medium to high streaks could probably pick and feel pretty good about. Again, if it's a tight nip and tuck game, high streaks want to avoid this because it's all going to be would a turnover happen, or it's a team driving with just a few seconds left trying to kick a game tying or possible winning field goal. But the other scenario that could work, but it'll be a little bit less, I guess, comfortable if you're a higher streak, would be if the Bears were blowing the Saints out. Because Drew Brees has a little bit of Peyton Manning in him, in that he likes to pad his stats, even in blowout games. For instance, look at last week versus Carolina. They were completely out of it. He should have probably been out of the game. What was he doing? Throwing, trying to get some yards, trying to get some touchdowns, extend records, that sort of thing. So that would make me a little nervous. An ideal scenario is the Saints leading by a ton of points in the fourth quarter. I think you pick no relatively easily there. Without any of that, high streaks, medium streaks, maybe a skip, monthly players, just get a feel for how the game's going. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks for giving me the weekend off to celebrate his birthday, and we'll see you next time on Street Talk.